My name is Caroline, and I'm working on the forum program with David. I'm going to be introducing our moderator for this session. Her name is Sue McCrory, and she's the editor and host of Public Radio Kitchen, which is WBUR's daily blog about Boston area food news. Sue has worked for WBUR for almost a decade, and she took on her position at Public Radio Kitchen in 2009. Since then, she has helped grow the blog's news offerings and reading audience by covering important food-related stories, issues, and events. Her heritage is rooted in Italy, but she appreciates any opportunity to learn about and share others' culinary traditions. She is thrilled to be here today, and we are thrilled to have her. She's really a good person to have, and she's going to be moderating our conversation. She is also a member of our advisory board for Let's Talk About Food. So please give a hand for Sue McCrory.
Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Caroline, for the intro. I am delighted to be here. It's a very important public forum and an educational forum. My job today is to introduce each of the three speakers and also to keep us on time. So to that end, I'm just going to get right to it. Our first speaker today is Ellen Parker. She is Executive Director of Project Bread, a nonprofit based right across the way in East Boston, and it's dedicated to alleviating, preventing, and ultimately ending hunger in Massachusetts. You might best know Project Bread as the organization behind the annual and hugely successful Walk for Hunger that's held each spring. In her role as director, Ellen has helped raise more than $100 million to feed hungry children and families in Massachusetts. Project Bread has evolved under her stewardship from a narrowly focused anti-hunger organization to a national model offering a comprehensive set of solutions for hunger relief and prevention. In particular, over the past decade, Ellen has been instrumental in reframing the thinking about hunger by focusing on public health and learning. She has brought together research institutions, legislators, hospital networks, corporate partners, the media, and school districts in this effort, and the results are powerful. The launch of a successful statewide campaign supporting universal breakfast for low-income elementary children. Also, the introduction of the Chefs in Schools initiative in Boston, Lawrence, and Salem. And lastly, the implementation of hunger screening programs in health centers across Massachusetts. Through her leadership at Project Bread, Ellen has worked to establish new nutritional standards for school meals while also providing funding for 400 emergency programs in 130 communities throughout Massachusetts. I'd like Ellen Parker to come on up and share her words. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. What a great program. This has really been exciting and interesting. So I just have to balance my water here, and I'll be all set. I want to start off by just telling you that school meals, healthy school meals, have been a great passion and an interest for us at Project Bread for over a decade. In my view, the school meals program, breakfast and lunch free and at a very reduced fee for low-income children, can offer one of the highest level protections against hunger for kids. School Meals is an anti-hunger program, and it should be one of the best anti-hunger programs in America. But it's a program that needs a little infusion of a little healthier food, and that's what we've been doing. So the next 10 minutes, I'm going to answer the question of, which you didn't, so my slide should say, what does the Farm Bill, so imagine there's a slide up there that says, what does the Farm Bill have to do with, what, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to click it on. It's not in there. It's not in there. Oh,
that's my mistake.
Oh, that's okay. I can just say it. Don't be sorry. How the Farm Bill affects what's on a student's plate. So in the next 10 minutes, I am going to answer this question by linking together 5 separate ideas. Number 1, what's on the plate now? And whose interests are being served along with lunch? Number 2, if we imagine a future where health and well-being of America's school children is at the center of our concern, then what would our kids be eating for lunch? 3, how does the current Farm Bill and all the farm bills that preceded it define what our children eat at lunch. 4, what are the changes that we need to see in a new farm bill that can promote better and healthier school food? And what are the tools that we need to have right here in the community to make that happen? And 5, who cares? Who cares about it now? Who should care about it? So school food has never been a real glamour profession. School food has never had very high status in a school, and it never really gets very much attention from the school system. Nutrition services are typically within the purview of the business manager. In a small school, there'll be a little business manager. In a bigger school, there'll be a whole department. They're usually in with the janitorial staff and the buses. So the primary concerns, because of the location, both the fact that they're located in a school system and where in the school system they're located, the key concerns are always food cost, labor cost, convenience, and revenue. So nutrition services are required to operate in a school without a subsidy. So it's, one nutrition director said, every boat on its own bottom. Which, I guess that's an expression of no local subsidy. But they're dependent on the revenue that's derived from selling food in the cafeteria. So that really starts to explain why if the kids are eating pizza and French fries every day, and that's working, there's a lot of resistance to changing that because revenue is a really, really big consideration for school nutrition directors. Highly processed, shelf-stable, reheatable food is the cheapest food that schools can buy. This highly processed, high-calorie food is cheap because its ingredients, corn, wheat, and soybeans, and all of their multiple and many manifestations, including high fructose, the notorious high fructose corn syrup, are 3 of the 5 most highly subsidized crops in the United States. So a lot of the food that kids eat in schools are derived from combinations of these 3 crops. Those subsidy programs, those crop subsidy programs, are located in the Farm Bill, and they function to decrease the cost of processed food for school children and everybody else who goes shopping on a limited budget. So there's the second type of subsidy, school food subsidy, that's located in the Farm Bill, is called the Commodity Foods Program. And commodity foods for schools started right after the Great Depression when farmers had a lot of surplus crops, and there was a real concern that families didn't have enough to eat. So what started with the struggling farmers and children in local community schools has really gotten to be quite a big program. It's roughly 12% of the entire national school food budget. What basically the Commodity Foods Program is a price support. Surplus food is purchased, and then it's passed on to kids. There are about 200 products available in commodities, so things like canned fruit, canned chicken, canned turkey, canned pork, frozen ground beef, canned vegetables, kind of a dull array of products. The distribution system of commodity foods requires that the products be fairly stable because it takes a long time for these commodity foods to get distributed. So it requires the product to be stable because the commodity foods takes a really long road from the field to the plate. All commodity food is processed to some extent. And in the past, and this is still somewhat true, schools have tended to order more processing rather than less processing. So that's where those little breaded chicken stars that kids eat in the cafeteria come from, that they get sent out and they get made into all sorts of shapes and breaded and sent back and frozen, and they're reheatable. Well, every school that participates in the National School Lunch Program is eligible to receive school lunch commodities. Low-income schools tend to take more of the commodities and use them. So you really start to see this ongoing emerging pattern of a lot of the processed food going into low-income communities. The subsidy programs in the Farm Bill help some farmers, but not all farmers. Over the past few years, I think Marion pointed this out, past few years there's been tremendous pressure for subsidy around vegetables. Some progress is being made, but it's still just vastly overshadowed by the big commodities. So if you own acres and acres, imagine you owned acres and acres of corn and soybeans, these Farm Bill subsidies look pretty darn good. But if you're a low-income middle school kid at the Umana Barns, right down the street from my office in East Boston, and you're struggling with your weight, and school food is pretty much the only place you're going to be able to get a regular meal, well, it's not a very good deal at all. The huge amount of processed food that flows into schools, especially low-income schools, sets up the poorest and the most vulnerable kids in our school system for a lifetime struggle with their weight and a whole host of bad outcomes that are associated with it. So let's make a shift here and imagine what it would be like if the focus of school lunch was actually the health and well-being of kids. What would that look like? How would it be resourced? Well, it turns out that we have a pretty ready and quick answer to that question. It comes from the prestigious Committee on Child School Nutrition Standards, which is located in the even more prestigious Institute of Medicine. And this committee of pediatricians, scientists, public health authorities, school nutritionists met for a number of years, reviewed the impact of school nutrition on child health. And 2 years ago, finally the committee, after a number of years of study, released a series of evidence-based recommendations to change the nutrition standards for school meals. So what were their recommendations? Everybody in the room can list them, I'm sure. Scale back sodium, eliminate trans fats, decrease the amount of fat in the dairy products that are made available, increase the number of servings of vegetables, green, and they differentiate green and orange. Choose whole grains over processed grains. Choose whole fruit over fruit juice. They also made the point that tomato paste was not a vegetable, in case you were wondering, and also made the point that we should be cutting back on potatoes. And so if you're thinking, well, like, how come potatoes? The fact is that what it really means is we should stop feeding our children French fries and pizza every single day, which happens more than you would think. So nobody thought that the Committee on Child School Nutrition Standards was some kind of revolutionary group. But when their recommendations came out, people went crazy over it. The big food manufacturers said it absolutely couldn't be done. It was far too expensive. The government had no right to mandate, only to suggest and to recommend. And the pace of change had to be slowed down. So here's the thing. In light of the fact that it took a full 15 years for any standard even to be discussed or changed, it's hard to see how much slower the pace of change could be in the standards for school nutrition. So the pressure not to change from the food industry, from big food, and from agribusiness, the pressure not to change was really phenomenal. It was intense, and it was unrelenting. So I have to say, to the eternal credit of our president and Secretary Tom Vilsack, who's the Agriculture Secretary, just last week, these recommendations, hardly radical recommendations, but these recommendations were passed, 90% of them were passed. And it was really, we at Project Bread, we really didn't think this was going to happen. I mean, there was just such pressure against it. But tomato paste actually stayed in the vegetable column, and potatoes back again. So other than the potatoes and the tomato paste, but it's tremendous. I mean, it's a really, really big, important change. I think that the day is going to come when those breaded chicken stars and the breaded mozzarella sticks and my personal favorite, the Uncrustables, will vanish from our school cafeterias. But it's a slow change because all our priorities around public health are in direct conflict with priorities of big food and big agriculture. In the context of understanding that this change is slow, we also have to recognize that the needs of America's children are, particularly low-income children, are very acute. And they demand our attention. We need to push hard for subsidies that are in line with our public health priorities. Schools need access to a wide variety of vegetables, and a culture of cooking has to come to replace the current culture of microwaving and reheating. So that might sound like a really insurmountable challenge, but it's not. Over the past 6 years, Project Bread has collaborated with the Harvard School of Public Health and developed a Chefs in Schools program. Our 3 chefs are in Chelsea, Salem, Boston, and what? Lawrence, how could I forget Lawrence? And Lawrence. They work every day in the cafeterias. They work with the cafeteria staff, and the idea is that we are training people to have better skills so they can cook real food, and the kids will start to eat it. You know, food is such a personal thing, and it means so much to kids. I mean, I've had so many experiences. I'm here with my colleague Sarah Klugish. We've both had so many experiences where the fact that there was a chef in a school made the kids so excited, and it made them feel so good, and it really made them feel like, wow, I'm special, what I eat is important, and it really changes kids' dietary habits. We're teaching cafeteria staff culinary and presentation skills, and they're learning to think like a chef. We're creating a cookbook to help school nutrition directors optimize their use of healthy foods. And our goal over the next 4 years is to bring these trainings and practices to scale across the Commonwealth, having an enormous impact on the life of every school-age child in Massachusetts, especially the over 343,000 kids who are living in low-income communities. So what's the key to success? The key to our success will be educating decision makers and parents to demand better food. But even if you're not the parent of a school-age child, you have a role to play because we're all affected by the Farm Bill. When every child in the Commonwealth has consistent access to a healthy breakfast and a healthy lunch, we begin to level the playing field and set the course for every child to meet his potential, her potential, his potential, their potential. What we demand of the Farm Bill and how we feed our kids can improve the long-term outcomes for the entire population. So join us. And thank you. Thank you for being here. It's really a delight.
Are there any questions for Ellen? And we'll have time for maybe 1 or 2?
Yeah, we've got a few minutes.
I have to put my glasses on.
Oh, I was just having sort of a, historical thought in my head about what we ate for school lunch in Tampa, Florida in 1958 or something like that. Do tell. And it was black-eyed peas. This is one of the black-eyed peas, fish sticks, and grits, and collard greens. Have to remember the collard greens. Sometimes there was salad or coleslaw on the thing, black-eyed peas, things like that. But it was all, even if it came in a big can, it was still real food. It was food.
Yeah, it was
and they
food
cooked it
cooked.
there. But collard greens was a big one.
Question?
Just a comment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds good. I love collard greens.
How do we get, I guess the question would be, how do we get back to that kind of food? And someone who sat there and said, and you eat your salad.
How do we get back? I think the easiest and most simple way to say how we get back is that we reintroduce cooking into the schools, and we stop saying that school nutrition, which sounds sort of gray and not very appetizing, is any way different from food. It's about cooking and eating and enjoying true food and getting healthy.
So
my question kind of goes with that, because I was wondering if there tends to be a common process that takes a school from serving weird Uncrustable stuff to real food again. Because you've got the chef in the school program thing that's going in those 4 schools you mentioned. I just wondered what schools that make the shift have in common process-wise. Who has to say something first? Who has to sign off on it? Who has to provide the support to get the program going?
That's an interesting question.
Let me just interrupt. Can you talk into the microphone because we're recording this? Thank you.
That's a good question. When we started in Boston, and we worked with the public health commissioner, and we worked with the mayor of Boston, and we worked with the school superintendent. That's how we got sort of the official sign-off. The work in the cafeteria, I think, is really made more successful by the fact that our chefs work in the cafeteria, that we don't have sort of consulting, commenting chefs. We actually have chefs who work with people. I think sometimes at the beginning people look at it as a change that they can't possibly make. I remember many days when people would say, you can't eat these chocolate chip cookies anymore because Project Bread has taken them away, and that kind of thing. But after a while, this is really, you've probably read about the impact that peers have on you. And I've really seen this in the schools. I really see that once things get going, everybody starts eating better. The cafeteria staff starts eating better. The teachers start eating better. The kids, it really has it has a synergistic effect, the fact that you're working with a group. So far we're just in Chelsea and Salem and Lawrence. Lawrence, we got up there because we have a very long and very close relationship with the Lawrence school nutrition director. And somebody gave us a very large gift, and we decided that Lawrence was an extremely important place to take it. We went to say, so far, I mean, we've really just worked it by city by city.
Okay. I feel strongly that we need to bring home ec and industrial arts back to the middle school level, because I think kids don't know what is in their food. Their parents may not cook. They need to learn to cook. I think that's going to be part of the solution to getting children healthier. What do you think?
I do too. I absolutely do. I also think that there's a truly generational difference between the way young people understand nutrition, the way young people we had 2 high school interns at Project Bread a couple years ago who would just, they were great. And not only were they great, and they were progressive, and they cared about stuff, but they went back to their communities in Mattapan and in Brighton, and they really became a beacon. Maybe some of you are familiar with the Food Project. I think the Food Project is a really good example of young people like becoming leaders and then going to their communities and leading from within. And yeah, cooking is great. I think that I can't say enough good things about cooking. And I loved home ec, just to tell you.
I've got the mic. I had a question. I thought you said something about a book or a pamphlet that is or is being prepared that is used for training on presentation and preparation for cafeteria personnel.
Yes, as part of this, we're doing right now. We're involved in this major project, which is the Lawrence and the Salem and the Chelsea and the Boston project. And part of that project is to develop, in conjunction with the people who are running the cafeterias in those 4 school districts, a cookbook that's going to be, a big cookbook that's going to be available to nutrition directors across the state.
So that's coming soon.
Well, not that soon.
Oh, okay.
Soon enough. Probably.
Okay.
It's not going to be done for a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our next speaker is Annette Higbee. Annette is Policy Director at the New England Farmers Union, which works on behalf of family farmers, foresters, and nursery growers to protect and improve their quality of life and economic well-being. The union also works on our behalf as consumers in all 6 states of the New England region. Annette is an attorney, an educator, a policy analyst, and an advocate for family farm agriculture. Her career spans 30 years. Most recently, she served as the Grassroots Advocacy and Outreach Coordinator for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition in Washington, D.C. Annette also coordinated the 2008 Farm Bill campaign for the National Campaign for Sustainable Agriculture, a role which suggests she has a wealth of experience to share as it relates to the current Farm Bill. When Annette practiced law in Vermont, the state where she now lives, her law firm focused on the issues of generational farm transfer, farm business formation, farmland leasing, and land tenure. It's my pleasure to introduce Annette Higbee. Thanks.
Stuff along, I can just use the arrow. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here on a Sunday afternoon. With my 10 minutes and 5 minutes for questions, I decided that rather than focusing on maybe a long-winded history of the Farm Bill, that I would instead focus on some of the positive aspects of what NEFA was working on in this Farm Bill round. This is my third or fourth Farm Bill. And I always start every Farm Bill round with a really positive attitude and lots of high hopes. But there's something different about this one, as Shelley suggested, that there's just there's something happening here that will allow us to really make some changes. And we've always, I mean, for every Farm Bill round, we've made incremental changes, small changes. One of the advantages of having this sprawling piece of legislation is that you can stick some good language in here and there and build on that and work on that. Get a program started, even if you have to work it through appropriations the following year. It's a beachhead, and you can build on that. A lot of the programs in the Pingree bill actually continue programs that we won in 2008 and add additional resources to them and add new nuances and purposes and other objectives to those programs. So this really is a Farm Bill that's going to be built on the shoulders of advocates that have been working this legislation for many, many, many years. So the New England Farmers Union is a regional chapter of the National Farmers Union. The National Farmers Union is about a 110-year-old organization that works primarily it's one of the largest farm organizations, focused primarily on small and mid-sized farmers, as opposed to some of the other farm organizations like the Farm Bureau that really focuses on carrying the water for big ag and agribusiness. The New England, or the National Farmers Union, has focused more on small and mid-sized farmers. The New England Farmers Union is one of the youngest chapters of the National. We were chartered in 2006, so we're the baby Farmers Union. Farmers Union allows its regional chapters to really focus on their own regional needs and develop their own policy options, and we've certainly taken advantage of that in pulling together a regional Farm Bill platform that you can find in the next room on one of the tables. We have about 1,500 members and growing. Most of our members are farmers, but we also have members who are food cooperatives. One of our affiliate members is the Neighboring Food Co-op Association that has 40 food co-ops as a member that together make up about 80,000 consumers in New England. So we have this, I think, really potent combination of farmer and consumer voices to make change and to speak in one voice to those in Washington, D.C. about the kind of food and fiber system that we want to have in the future. I mentioned our Farm Bill platform. We also have a policy book available on our website. That's the link there. Our policy work is grassroots generated in the sense that it comes from farmers. So we have a policy committee made up of farmers. If you go to our website, you can actually submit policy option suggestions that our policy committee will suggest or will consider. If you become a member, you can become a member for $35. You can come to our annual meeting and make a suggestion of a policy option suggestion from the floor, and we'll talk about it. It's very grassroots. It's also, the Farmers Union, or NIFU, is made up of sustainable agriculture, sustainable farmers, organic farmers, and conventional farmers. I think that's part of our strength, that we have a fairly large umbrella. It's one of the only settings I can think of where, as we did at our last annual meeting, sit down and have a conversation about GMO labeling that was civil, thoughtful, and respectful. And there are lots of farm settings where that conversation is very difficult, very filled with tension. And you can go to our website and look at our policy book and see the results of that discussion. We ended up signing on to the Just Label It campaign is a GMO strategy. So we work on federal farm legislation. That includes Farm Bill, but also Farm Bill implementation, because once the Farm Bill is passed, then you're working on rules and implementation of the programs that you won. In some cases, there are also programs that are subject to annual appropriations, so we also work on federal agricultural appropriations. We've worked on Food Safety Modernization Act to ensure that there are alternative compliance measures for small and mid-sized farmers, just to provide that those farms aren't shut out of these new burgeoning markets that are so important to rural development on a food safety basis. We've tried to put in place some resources to help small farmers implement scale-appropriate food safety management and training kinds of programs. We also, our farmers are also, as most farmers are in New England, diversified small farms. We're also reaching out to the fisheries in New England, on some of the coastal organizations, where we'll be including a number of policy options in our policy book, and bringing in fishermen, both fin and shellfish, to provide a voice for those folks in Washington as well. So this is our list of 6 areas where we'll be focusing our Farm Bill resources. The conservation title has been mentioned a number of times today, and I'll have a few more details about that in a second. Certainly local and regional food systems is one of our priorities. A safety net for small and mid-sized dairy farmers. Dairy in New England is, I think, one of the, it's an important strategy for keeping our landscape a working landscape. Most of our farms are small and mid-sized. There's a program within the commodity title called the Milk Income Loss Contract Program. Unlike direct payments and countercyclical payments, it has a really effective targeting mechanism, so that most of the benefits of that program go to farm herds of 250 to 300 cow dairies. And it's a program that's essential to maintaining a dairy industry in New England. It was, in the so-called secret farm bill, eliminated, and in place were going to put in place a more industrial dairy-friendly provision that would ensure revenue. So one of our big fights for this farm bill is to maintain a milk program, or something like milk, that will allow our small and mid-sized dairies to stay in operation. I mean, the primary purpose of the milk program is to maintain a steady price. Both farmers and consumers benefit when the price, when you can avoid big spikes in a price, which allows retailers to increase the price. Strangely, they never seem to come down. But that sort of price stability is essential for our small and mid-sized farmers. So we're going to be working on that. Organic agriculture is also a priority of ours. Rural and cooperative development, it's a big piece of our mission, is to serve producer co-ops and consumer co-ops. There are provisions within the Farm Bill that provide resources, and we'll be working to continue those. And we also are going to focus on beginning farmers to ensure that the next generation of farmers here in New England has the resources that are necessary to start farming. Conservation title priorities, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or also it's called EQIP, is important for our farmers. The EQIP program in this last Farm Bill round provided about up to $50 million annually to help farmers transition to organic production. We want to see that continued. It was also a program that provided assistance and support to farmers who wanted to put up hoop houses, which allowed them to extend their season and to bring more local and regional food to market. The Farm and Ranch Land Protection Program, that's also in the conservation title. That's the program that states use to get the resources that they need to conserve farmland in the 6 New England states and actually across the country. It's been essential to keeping our farmland open and working, and in many cases, certainly in Vermont, it's been essential to putting land in the hands of beginning farmers. Regional equity is a provision that we'll also be fighting for. It requires that the New England states or the New England region or the Northeast region receive adequate or equitable share of conservation dollars. In the past, I think primarily because of the Conservation Reserve Program or other allocations, a lot of the conservation dollars went to the Midwest. And we'll also be working on a higher EQIP cost share rates for beginning farmers. I'm going to skip ahead here. There are 2 marker bills in this round that we're focused on. A marker bill, sometimes they're short, sometimes they're long. The Local Farms Food and Jobs Act is Shelley Pingree's piece of legislation. It's, as earlier speakers already suggested, it's multi-title, it's comprehensive. It's introduced now in the hopes that when the chairman of the House or the Senate Ag committees put together their marker bill, which is presented to the committees for markup, that provisions within this marker bill will be included in that marker bill, so that those provisions end up going in front of the committee at the beginning of markup. So the idea here is to introduce the legislation, get as many co-sponsors as you possibly can. Shelley mentioned that there are already quite a few on this bill, so that it's more likely to end up in the chairman's mark. So the Local Farms Food and Jobs Act is one marker bill that we're focused on, and I'm going to go into some more detail on that. The other one is the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Opportunity Act, which involves a number of provisions that would help beginning farmers overcome barriers to startup, access to capital, credit, and technical assistance. Just generally, the Local Farms and Food Jobs Act overview. It provides income and financial support for local and regional food producers, financial support to build local regional food system infrastructure, expands access to healthy local food for consumers and schools, and it enhances research and extension services. There are a couple of highlights that make the bill attractive to us. The federal Farmers Market Promotion Program, which was passed in the 2008 Farm Bill, provides resources to farmers markets to get started or to do marketing. Shelley's bill takes the FMPP program and renames it the Local Marketing Promotion Program, expands its purposes, also reauthorizes it because the FMPP program would actually disappear if it wasn't reauthorized and refunded. And it also allows these market outlets to scale up in a sense and increase their activities. It would increase the business and industry loan program, and this is a program that would provide capital for, in particular, processing facilities, which the farmers in Vermont and elsewhere have a difficult time finding processing facilities for their livestock, as well as locally produced grains. So this would bring a significant amount of capital, in fact, up to $100 million to rural communities to build that infrastructure. Would improve SNAP participant access to farmers markets, CSAs, and other direct marketing venues by allowing them to use their EBT cards at CSAs, community-supported fisheries, and other outlets. Allow schools the option to use some of their commodity dollars to actually buy local and regional food system or foods. It would expand the value-added producer grant program, which provides grants to farmers to do feasibility studies on on-farm value-added, as well as the capital necessary to take the next step. So it expands the purposes of the VAPG program to include food hub, aggregation, and other services in underserved states and communities. And Shelley mentioned this as well, that a lot of the crop insurance programs don't serve organic farmers well or small-scale diversified farmers. So the bill requires USDA to create or to look at a whole farm revenue insurance product for specialty crop producers, livestock, and mixed grain farmers. We think that crop insurance programs really need to recognize the risk management benefits of organic agriculture and of diversified farming systems and organic systems, and we'd like to see that change happen. There's, it does look as if direct payments are going to be eliminated in this round. They're unjustifiable, and I think Big Ag recognizes that, but we still need to watch our purse. They're looking to likely to replace it with a larger, more complicated crop insurance program that is likely to serve just a few commodities. And will also, I think, break a promise that we made with farmers back in 1985. In 1985, we said to farmers, if you want to get commodity programs, we're going to expect from you certain environmental standards be upheld. So in 1985, it was called cross-compliance. If you wanted to participate in USDA programs, you had to have a conservation plan. A lot of the shifting of the commodity subsidies, the insurance subsidies, are not going to include that cross-compliance requirement, and that's disturbing to me. The other thing that Shelley's bill does is expanded the use of the specialty crop block grants, which was a program passed just in 2008, was actually the first Farm Bill program that served specialty crops, which is Farm Bill speak for fruits and vegetables. So Shelley's bill brings a whole new resources to that and actually sets aside $30 million just for local and regional food system grants.
In the interest of time.
Okay.
You want to make a concluding thought, and then we'll move on just so that Tim has a chance to speak.
Okay, this is my last slide. So, so if you're looking for something to do, you know, if you're fired up and you come home tonight and you're not quite sure, you know, what you're going to do with all this information, the one thing that you can do is that you can call the Capitol switchboard. There's the number right there. And these are the members of the Massachusetts delegation who are not yet co-sponsors of the Local Farms, Food, and Jobs Act. Remember I said the game is you get as many co-sponsors as you possibly can. You want to get this into the Farm Bill, you've got to have lots of people on it. And in particular, we need a Republican. So if you can just call Scott Brown and urge him, you've heard a lot about Shelley's bill today. You can speak to it. You can speak about it. There's a 2-page summary description out in the hallway next door. Just get on the phone, ask him to co-sponsor this bill. It's good for Massachusetts consumers. It's good for Massachusetts farmers. It makes a whole lot of sense, and we need him on it. And if you have time, you can call these other folks too. So I'll conclude with that. Sorry, how long did I go? Ooh.
Perfect. That's a super call to action and a great way to end. Thank you, Annette. Our next speaker is Timothy Griffin. Tim is an associate professor at Tufts University's Friedman School of Nutrition, Science, and Policy, the only graduate and professional school of nutrition in North America. At Friedman, Tim also serves as director of the Agriculture, Food, and Environment program, which mentors advanced degree students. Tim is a crop and soil scientist by training. His current interests focus on how policy decisions impact the adoption of agricultural practices and systems, and how best to establish equitable food systems on a local and region-wide basis. Prior to coming to Tufts, Tim worked for the USDA as a research scientist and also as a sustainable agriculture extension specialist at the University of Maine. Let's welcome Tim Griffin.
Thank you. So I have two challenges. One, it's late Sunday afternoon. Secondly, got my notes, forgot my glasses. So, and I'm very farsighted, so if you could hold them up in the back of the room, I could read them. So I'm going to try to be to the point here. So even though it's late in the afternoon, what I'm going to talk about is the beginning of our food supply chain. And what I want to do is give you just a little bit of concreteness about how farmers in New England interact with certain parts of the Farm Bill, because as you've heard, there are certain parts of it that influence New England farmers very, very little. The things like direct payments and commodity payments and conservation reserve program, things like that. So what I want to do instead is focus on the things where we actually, maybe we're not treated totally equitably because we are a small region, but it is significant. But the other thing I want to do is just give you a few examples of the different kind of mechanisms by which those interactions take place. Some of the programs that I've talked about, you will have heard about probably multiple times already this afternoon, but that's okay. So I'll focus on mostly environmental and conservation oriented programs, but not entirely. That's kind of one category, environmental and the protection of resources. There is a lot in the Farm Bill, although there's not a lot of funding that goes with it that flows to New England around business and market development, which has been certainly a topic of much discussion at this and other venues like this, particularly around stimulating systems that kind of up the ante in terms of producing specific types of products, specific types of foods. And then I'll talk a little bit right at the end just about sustainability with one specific program. So one of the programs that you have heard about, and Annette mentioned this, is the EQIP program. It's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. It's been around for a while. It actually formed as a consolidation of some other conservation programs. And it's what you would call practice-based. So what it does is provides incentives to farmers to implement certain types of practices, some of which are fairly conventional and mundane, if you will. Simple things that have, for example, water quality benefits, like fencing animals out of streams and lakes. Planting cover crops to prevent soil erosion, testing soils and balancing nutrients, things like this, all the way to what in some cases has been criticized, things like cost sharing to help build concrete structures to hold livestock waste. But the list of practices that farmers that they can interact in that way is very, very long. And it's implemented through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is a technical service provider within USDA. So it is, and this was mentioned earlier, it's a cost share program. And this is one mechanism. And what it is it's a usually 75%, it can be more in some cases. 75% is basically paid by the American taxpayer. 25% is paid by the farmer. So it is a public investment, but not necessarily 100% investment to provide incentives for farmers to protect the environment. And the goal is not to get them to do that and then pay them every year for the next 20 years. I look at it anyway as get them to start doing certain things, and then it almost as a transitional. There has been some innovation in that area, organic ag, high tunnel production. We've heard those discussed a few times already. But the list is very, very long, and there are a lot of different kinds of farms in New England, and a lot of them can find ways to interact. That interaction is through NRCS and also through the Farm Service Agency, which is located generally in almost every county. So we think of the Farm Bill as this monolithic piece of legislation, and we think of USDA, maybe rightly so, as this monolithic agency. The way that farmers interact with it is different than that. They do not interact with USDA as this big block that exists in Washington. The funding decisions in programs like that are made at they're kind of directed at the state level, but in many cases are made by at the level of counties or districts. So it's not quite as anonymous as it might be made out to seem. The feds direct how much money goes there, but they're not necessarily micromanaging that, and I think it's an important point. USDA interactions can be very, very local. Another example that came up, and because this is a different kind of partnership, I guess, and Annette mentioned this, which is the Farm and Ranch Land Protection, which is trying to keep land in agriculture, which in places particularly like southern New England is very important, where you have a lot of urbanization pressure on farmland. Those are generally a partnership between some private entities, farmers, landowners, USDA, and state investment. So Farms for Maine's Futures, is that what it's called? That is a good example of that, where it's actually money that comes from state level, but it's combined with other sources to try to, through purchase and development rights, easements, things like that, to try to maintain that base. If you want to rejuvenate the food system in New England and the Northeast, one of the principal concerns is we've lost a tremendous amount of farmland over the last, not just that recently, really over about the last 100 years. So, so that's a different type of interaction. Along the kind of business and market development, one of the ones that's come up many times today is just the ways that USDA can stimulate assistance for new and beginning farmers, which generally is not a flow of assistance or money from USDA to farmers. It's support for other organizations that provide ongoing training to, in some cases, new and beginning farmers, but there's also a funding stream that goes to more longer lasting and in some ways more conventional educational venues like cooperative extension. So a different kind of interaction and a different type of investment. So the last one that I'll mention, partly because it's a favorite of mine, I worked with this group for a long, long time. There is within USDA, and it's to be honest, a pitifully small amount of money. It is tens of millions, but not much more than that. And it's a program called the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, or which everybody has their acronyms, so we call it SARE. It's been around for about 20 years. Part of that supports kind of system-level research on how we produce food. And the program is run regionally, which is really one of the only programs that's like that. So there is a Northeast region SARE. It's currently based in Vermont. It's directed by Vern Grubinger, who works for the University of Vermont. Within that, there are multiple ways that benefit, multiple opportunities that benefit farmers, one of which is farmer grants. They're basically grants to farmers for innovation. And I don't know what the number is. I was on the committee that distributed those starting in the late 90s, but it has to be hundreds of grants that have gone out specifically to farmers, and they do some of the education. So a very, very different kind of interaction with USDA in that case. But there's also things like community oriented grants, and in some cases market development types of grants, in addition to what you might think is more conventional, either research or outreach oriented. But that particular program, more than any other program that I know that has kind of a research and outreach, is intensely farmer focused. It's really, it's a delight to work with groups like that are very, very focused on what can we do that will develop new information and try to achieve some of these goals that we've heard talk about today, whether it's, you know, innovative practices, innovative systems, new markets, local food systems, regional food systems. It comes out of efforts like that. But it's spread across a much broader diversity of both individuals and groups than a lot of other programs that come out of USDA. As we've heard, we kind of get blocked out of certain things. So with that, I'm gonna stop. Those are examples of both some programs and also interactions that already take place in New England. So it's not, you know, I'd love to see them all expanded, so please follow up, as you heard earlier, make those phone calls, write those letters. But those are things that are already happening. So keep that in mind. There's some good interactions out there, so thank you. And if we have time for questions, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Let's have one, maybe two questions. I saw you guys first.
My question is a little bit higher level than some of the details of the programs you've been describing today. The movement for local foods, of course, is a very strong grassroots organization that's going on now. But to promote that over time as it grows and grows and grows, what has to happen to bring the price down of these foods? Because currently, produce that is locally grown costs considerably more than what can be found in a mainstream supermarket. What can be done to prevent this from being viewed in Washington as just an elitist movement?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. One is in the having local foods be more expensive than what we might term industrial foods is not as clear as is portrayed a lot. There are certainly instances of that. There are other instances of it where it's local farmers selling at farmers markets at prices that are comparable to what would be in a grocery store. So I don't think it's there is a lot of discussion, and in some cases almost an assumption that if it's local, it has to be more expensive. The other point, and I've had a couple of long discussions about that this week, is that one of the reasons that this other large flow of food is less expensive in some instances is because it doesn't carry the entire cost of the food, i.e., it doesn't carry any of the environmental costs associated with the production of that food. And in some cases, as we heard about with highly processed foods, in excess, it also doesn't carry the costs, the health costs associated with it. So that cost that might be, you know, an industrial flow of lettuce and peppers from gigantic farms is not necessarily the real cost of that food that we would compare to what might be coming, you know, from a farmer's market or a diversified farm in bigger quantities than that. So when I look at it, so I'll put my kind of researcher hat on, there's a lot of need for more clarity about what that actually looks like. But having costs that actually contain all of those different facets is very, very important. And locally, in many cases, it actually does. But the further away it is and the more kind of steps in that supply chain, I was at an event the other night that said the longer that is, the less accountability there is. And that's true. And the less accountability the less accounting of some of those costs associated with it.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question, and people are going to be starting to filter in from the other sessions. So one more question, and that'll be it. Who wants to ask it? Okay.
My specific interest is in the farm-based education and public programming pieces of a lot of local farms that we're seeing here. And I don't know how that's considered in this structure, if it's considered I know it's not technically considered an added value product, but where, if anywhere, will we, or can we, or should we encourage efforts to, through legislation, promote that kind of programming, which is adding entirely new revenue streams to local farms and helping with offset some of those costs of the environmental degradation and human health issues that the current food system is contributing to?
That's a great question that I don't have a very good answer for, so I'll just kind of improvise a little bit. But one of the places where it makes sense, and whether it's attached to that legislation or not, is things like we already have programs that we're trying to grow that encourage the flow of food directly from farms to schools. And there are a lot of informal relationships built around that farm-to-school structure where the farmers involved might also be interacting directly with students in schools. But it may be a place to provide a more formal mechanism that does that. Some of which can be, again, an additional kind of revenue stream for farms. But there's probably a few folks here that'd be better qualified to answer that than I would. But it's a great question. Great question. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to all three of our speakers, to Annette and Ellen and Tim. And stick around for the concluding session. And thanks very much for your participation and your